Let's start by understanding what is legal paradox. What's your story in crypto?
We have more or less like 272 meetings with the Mexican financial regulator in order to try to explain what we were doing in the fintech ecosystem and why that was so important. In general terms, you can see things in two different ways. Things that are for non-regulated or non-financial entities and things that are for financial entities. In the first side of the equation, it's really easy. In Mexico, if you are trying to obtain this kind of authorization, you will need like 840 days, which is a lot. Come on, we are from Latin America. We have a lot of imagination of how to make things different.
Remember to subscribe to the Frontera newsletter. There you're going to read a whole analysis of the Mexican regulatory environment. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Frontera, the podcast, where we analyze what's happening in crypto in Latin America. And today we have Carlos Valderrama. He is the founder of Legal Paradox, a legal firm specialized in fintech, crypto, blockchain in Mexico. And today's episode is going to be about everything you need to know to understand how to set up shop in Mexico, what's the regulation, what's the legal environment in the region. We decided to do this episode because Mexico is the largest market in Spanish-speaking LATAM, and a lot of people have asked us, what do I need to do to start a crypto company in Mexico? So, Carlos, thank you for being here. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for your invitation. A pleasure to be here. I'm happy to say hello to everyone who's listening.
Amazing. So, Carlos, let's start by understanding what is legal paradox. What's your story in crypto? I saw that you started Legal Paradox around 2017, 2016, where basically the fintech law was bubbling in the region. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, of course. So I used to be this huge lawyer, traditional lawyer in the system. And I used to be in charge of more or less 8 lawyers, have a corner office, in these huge corporatives in Santa Fe in Mexico. But that was, traditional stuff. So I began to get bored a little. And I started to try and try to understand a lot of things that were happening there. So back in 2012, for example, I was part of a member of the board of directors of a publicly traded company here in Mexico. And as part of that, we were presented in the meeting with a couple of options in order to try to perform M&A of other companies. And we were amazed because back then we have this company. We have been analyzed that, and we know this as something strange. They didn't have a lot of people, employees and so on, and they have a huge stack of money invested in technological efforts, and they were doing a lot of money. So for us, trying to analyze that, it was very strange. We thought that it was like something sketchy, something weird about that company. But after that, we understand that was fintech. The combination between finance and technology. And this is public information. We ended buying that company, and that was one of the most important trades for this publicly traded company in Mexico. After that, I kind of start to research more and more and more about it. And back then, I believe it was 2015, I started to talk to my partners, and I told them, we are doing a lot of interesting things. We are having huge deals, but the things that are going to be the best things in the future, it's not going to be the things that we are doing right now. It's not going to be traditional, financial ecosystem. It's going to be something else. And I'm starting to see something great happening in the fintech and blockchain space. So we need to put that shop specifically designed or in order to try to assess this kind of new things that are emerging. And back then, I was like building $2.5 million on yearly basis. So my partners told me, you are in drugs. This is not going to happen. Keep doing what you're doing and, forget about fintech and blockchain issues. 2017 happened, and I was kind of, getting the same train of thoughts. And then, I decided to try again and tell my partners, we have to do that. If we are not doing this, something else is going to do it. And then, 2016 ended and 2017 started. And I was like, this is going to be huge. Bitcoin, if I don't recall correctly, it was like 300K or something, 3000K or something. And in that regard, I started to see the curve in order to reach the 200K or so. And it was amazing for me because, I was investing heavily. After that, I tell myself, what the fuck, we need to do something and we need to do it now. And if my partners don't want to do it, I'm going to do it. So I talk with the general partner and tell him, I'm going to quit. I'm going to put my own shop, and it's only going to be focused on fintech or blockchain issues. And he kind of told me, you can do that, and do that for a year. And when you fail, because you are going to fail, please come back. You're going to have your, work here. So just do that, and have a try, and then come back, and we will be happy to receive you. And it's been like 8 years and I didn't come back. Came back, so it was pretty amazing. A lot of things happening right now. And as you were saying, back then in 2016, we have the negotiation of the so-called Mexican fintech law. So back then, the Mexican British embassy organized a trip in order for some major players in Mexico to assist to the London Fintech Week. And that's when everything started, because the secretary back then of state kind of thought that a lot of things are happening and it's really amazing the change that you can see in the fintech space. So let's have something like that in Mexico. So he ordered CNBV, which is the National Change Commission in Mexico, to draft the first lines of the so-called Mexican fintech law. And we were happy back then because we were the only law firm or lawyers that were in charge of negotiating this from the fintech ecosystem side. We have more or less like 272 meetings with the Mexican financial regulator in order to try to explain what we were doing in the fintech ecosystem and why that was so important. And what were the things that were not only going to change the financial Mexican ecosystem, but also the reconfiguration of wealth and being able to provide opportunities where there were none before, and so on. So it was a very exciting process, but we were kind of being like this is not going to happen. There were a lot of talks. We started to do that back in 2018. So 2016 ended. Then we were in 2018 and we didn't have the law. And then we have a close meeting in December 2018 with the president in that moment and other important figures in the Mexican fintech and financial space. And in that meeting, he said, I'm going to see this through, and we are going to publish that law. And then January started, February, and finally in March, 8 March, we have the so-called Mexican fintech law, which was the first fintech law in the entire world. So Mexico was doing history. It was really amazing.
That's amazing. As someone who's half English and sort of grew up seeing a lot of the fintech innovations that came through, a lot of that driven by Monzo and sort of some of these big players, right? I think it's really interesting to sort of get that backstory and actually just fascinating to think about as well. So tell us like the before and after of what it was like to be a fintech startup or generally sort of a tech-enabled financial services company in Mexico, and what did you see sort of on this trip to England, and what were sort of the key inspirations that you said this is exactly what we need, and we believe we will catalyze innovation 100x by implementing these new laws in Mexico?
Yeah, and but back in 2010, 2016, the first fintech company started 2012, something like that. One of the first was 2008, sorry. But a lot happened back then. For example, in 2016, we have more or less 132 fintech companies in Mexico. And we were like discussing, do we even really need a Mexican fintech law? is that something that will be positive for innovation and something that will change things? And everyone was trying to figure out what we will be, doing in that regard, no? And that was some major discussion about that. There
Carlos,
were some entrepreneurs that were saying, we are fine. Let's try not to move things because if we do have a regulation, we are going to have limitations, and we are going to, make sure to comply with a lot of things that we are not doing right now, and that's going to implicate a lot of costs because we
Carlos,
are going not
sorry.
only to hire lawyers, but also to make an investment, really huge investment in all these kind of areas. And on the other hand, we have these other entrepreneurs that were subject to investigation by CNBV because they were saying that we were doing, illegal handling of receiving money. If that was the case, the penalty for that is 15 years of prison. So it was really something. And for example, back in 2016, more or less 32% of the entire fintech ecosystem was under investigation. So it was kind of serious. And that's kind of why we were like, talking with the Mexican regulator, trying to tell them that we were not bad guys, that we were just doing, things really, really different with a lot of technology and efficient, and trying to get down cost of general financial services in Mexico, but also proving a lot of new things that were happening on a international basis. So what we have at the end, was these 132 companies were kind of on the umbrella of the Mexican fintech law, and we were saying, when we were in those negotiations, we think like four or maybe eight, if we were lucky, of these fintech companies were going to be on the other side, because there were a lot of new regulation, and back then you could do this with 100K Mexican pesos, but when everything happened, you will need a minimum capital that it was in the millions of pesos. So we really think that not a lot of companies were going to be ready for these kind of stuff. So if you fast forward now, it's really amazing because not only the fintech regulatory ecosystem grew and grew a lot. We went from 132 to 1,068 or so, fintech companies in Mexico. And more or less, we have like 80% of the enterprises that were subject to an authorization to be authorized by now. So it's been like there are two different tire words, and I really think that this was something that the Mexican fintech law originated, because only in the financial regulator sector we have more or less like 2 billion Mexican pesos invested in this kind of companies. So imagine the explosive growth of the ecosystem. It's been really amazing to see this kind of stuff.
I think I want to recall the things that you said. So you took a round of 272 meetings with regulators. I mean, that's a Herculean task. And I that's one of the tasks that maybe if you tell a normal person, hey, do you want to meet 272 times with a regulator? They would say, no, thank you. So basically, thank you for doing that because someone needed to do it and you went through that. And also another point that you said that back in what was it, 2012, there were 100 fintech companies, or when was this year? 200, 2016?
2016, 132.
132. And today, in the last frontera that you can go and read the report in our newsletter, we published the Finavista report where they say that there are around of 1,100 companies, so 1,100, more, give or take. So basically, the industry has grown tenfold in 10 years. So that's crazy. That's a really accelerated growth, and definitely having regulatory clarity is something critical for that. And also, that's 32% of fintech companies back in 2016 were under investigation. That sounds like crypto in the US last year. with Uniswap and OpenSea. So this is a huge important as to have clear regulation. And one key question is that you're an expert in this specific law, and a lot of crypto companies want to enter Mexico. What would you tell them? Like, what's the initial steps that they need to follow to set up shop in Mexico? Obviously, none of this is legal advice and all of that, but what are the steps, like the high level steps that they need to operate in Mexico?
And maybe for answering that, you need to keep in mind that when we were, trying to lobby and negotiate this Mexican fintech law, we have two different type of clients, for example. We have this excellent entrepreneur that were being recognized by universities such as Stanford, MIT, and others. We're receiving grants by foreign countries such as France, London, and Singapore and so on. But in Mexico, they were being prosecuted and they were being investigated. So it was really crazy because at the same time, when we were, negotiating the so-called Mexican fintech law, and they were seen as these huge innovators, and the people with experience and the people that were making things happen here in Mexico. Just crossing, from the regulator office, and entering the other one, the prosecuting one, they were seen as criminals. So it was really, really, really crazy trying to navigate that. I started losing my hair back then because if found guilty, my clients, we only have like six months in order to make them clear of every single accusation. Lucky for us, we had good legal processes, and none of them were fined. None of them were in prison, but it was a lot of pressure, not only for them, but also for us as their external counsels. And in general terms, if a company in the blockchain ecosystem wants to enter Mexico, I will start, by making an assessment from the business equation of the business side of it. We are a top country in the entire world, not only in Latin America, and we are growing very rapidly. We have more than 10 million potential users that have already some kind of exposure to crypto or blockchain assets, and we are having this enormous interest not only by traditional normal people, but also by family offices and stuff. So for example. I don't believe this is public, but I'm not under an NDA in that regard. BlackRock in Mexico has like 20 billion or so only in their ETF. So it's really quite something, the growth that we have been seeing in the entire blockchain ecosystem. And as you were saying, this is not legal advice. Please go and look for your legal specialist in order to provide an assessment on what are you going to do here in Mexico. But in general terms, you can see things in two different ways. Things that are for non-regulated or non-financial entities, and things that are for financial entities. In the first side of the equation, it's really easy because back in 2018, when the Mexican fintech law happened, we also have a lot of modifications to our laws. Among those modifications were the AML laws, and in that regard, in general terms, you will need to have compliance with this kind of regulation. Regulation that it's general, and that when you are pursuing, and this is an international basis, it's called a VASP, a virtual asset service provider. You only will need a registration, and you are ready to go, because you should make that you are in compliance with all the other regulation, like data personal regulation and so on. But when you are talking, for example, with financial things, that's more tricky, because in the beginning, and this was going to be huge, because in the first draft of the so-called Mexican fintech law, we had another entity. It was an exchange, and this was like a little bank that was going to be duly connected to the Mexican financial ecosystem. So when CNBV, sent the draft of the Mexican fintech law to the Mexican central bank, they say that this is not going to happen. Please, eliminate that entity, and that was that. But at the end, in the Mexican fintech law, there was this possibility of financial companies, three different companies, being able to interact with virtual assets, and those was banks and the two new financial entities, the IPES and the e-money or e-wallets, and the crowdfunding companies. So we were really excited. And, in 2019, when the Mexican Central Bank said, we need to have a distant relationship between the virtual assets and the Mexican, financial ecosystem, traditional ecosystem, we were kind of, having second thoughts at that. But what did I do? Because, back then, I was requested to provide a lecture to a couple of officials from the Mexican Central Bank, and I explained that, what was blockchain, what was the advantage, and I think, I went too far by telling them that, we won't need intermediaries. So in essence, a Mexican Central Bank and, all the intermediaries in the Mexican financial system are going to disappear. And I suppose, I don't know if I did, a bad or a good job, but after that, they issued this regulation, and we have, been trying to find legal loops in order to make that happen for financial regulations. But the important thing is that the fintech regulation expressly mentions that when you have secondary regulation or a principal regulation that does not allow you to launch your business model, and you are doing this in a different way with different technology, you can file for a sandbox model. So the same law, has the answer for that. But in general terms, you will need to make an assessment. What is the service or product that you are offering to the public? And if this is something related to a financial service, usually there is a regulation that it's going to, if not directly, indirectly, going to be applicable to you. So you will need to reach to legal consultation in order to see what's all that about. For example, for the most easiest cases, you can start operations in 2 months, but in the more complicated ones, for example, we have this amazing client called Authorized that it's tokenizing Mexican bonds, CETES, and they took like 3 years in the entire process. But now, they have a public notice by the CNBV, and telling them how they can proceed with their business model, and that kind of give them monopoly in order to offer these kind of services, because no one in Mexico has the ability to do that like they do in right now. So again, you will need to make an assessment of what's the thing you are going to offer in Mexico, and talk to a really good lawyer, because this is pretty new stuff. So a lot of lawyers are not in the scope. That's why back in 2018 we started to talk with a lot of universities in order to launch courses and lectures addressed to lawyers in order to have this done.
Amazing. And you mentioned several times the term IFPE, and that's like the license of fintech companies that allows companies to interact with crypto. One really important thing that basically everyone outside need to answer or need to understand is that IFPE license, right? So when does a company need an IFPE license? How much does it cost to get that license, like overall, and how long does it take? I think that's like the holy grail question that everyone's asking.
Yeah, in general terms, if you only are getting transactions done in the crypto ecosystem, for example, I want to send you my fiat, and in exchange I want to receive, let's say, Solana. You don't need a wallet for that. You don't need an IPE, because you are only exchanging fiat for crypto, right? For virtual assets, and for that you will need a VASP registry, a virtual asset service provider registry. But when you are trying to do more sophisticated stuff, for example, being able to hold fiat for your clients to being able to then or later decide what type of crypto they want to buy. So let's say that I'm going to send 1,000 Mexican pesos. And then I'm going to need that money because tomorrow, or maybe, I'm trying to chase good opportunities in order to try to buy Solana. But if I'm doing that the company, it's actually holding Mexican pesos or fiat. And if you are doing that, then you will need an IPE. And an IPE, it's a lot of things. Not only being able to hold fiat, you could also have money transfer. You can also become payment processors. There are a lot of activities, and that's kind of why I think that you call an IPE the holy grail for the blockchain ecosystem. Because if you want to do more sophisticated stuff, yeah, you will need this kind of license. And this is, imagine like you are requesting an authorization in order to operate as a little Mexican bank with all that implied. Because having a bank not only in Mexico but also on general terms in every single country, it's really complicated. So normally in Mexico, if you are trying to obtain this kind of authorization, you will need like 840 days, which is a lot. But in general terms, the Mexican financial regulator, it's not has not been very. It's been very slow when trying to decide whether or not they want to authorize these kind of companies. Uh, and in general terms, those are the days you will need to wait in order to receive an authorization. We can
It's
have
crazy.
that in half the time, but
830
there are a lot
days.
of
It's
time in that
crazy.
regard. Sorry, you were saying.
No, yeah, 830 days is crazy. I mean, 830 days ago, we were in NFTs in crypto or something like that. I mean, I don't know. It's crazy, really. And regarding cost, 830 days, that sounds expensive.
Well, for example, just to give you another data, when you are trying to incorporate a bank in Mexico, you will need like 400 and so days. So it's really crazy that for an IPE it's kind of dull. But it really depends, what type of legal advice you receive in that regard. As I was saying, we are able to obtain that in 400 and so days. You don't only need to build legal documents. You will also need to have a business plan, financial projections, cybersecurity issues, uh, separation accounts for your money, the money of your clients, and operations. A lot of requirements, and that not only are going to demand from you that you hire professional advice in the legal arena, but also in the financial, cybersecurity, and all the other areas that you will need. That's kind of why in legal products we are not only lawyers. We have professional for these all different sectors. And we're talking about how much money this will cost. It will really depend. What type of things your external people it's going to do. It could be as low as 40K plus VAT. This is talking about dollars, of course, but it could reach to 500 or so dollars, depending on what would be the amount of things that these external advisors are going to do before you. Because it's not only obtaining and securing the authorization in order to become an IPE. After that, you will need to require or request different specific services or authorization from the regulator. For example, if you want to being able to receive other fiat that it's not Mexican peso, let's say dollars, or let's say yuan or so, you will need to have a express request before the regulator in order to make that happen. If you want, for example, to being able to receive that same currency in Mexico, you will need to have an authorization in that regard. Where you are trying to connect directly to the Mexican system for payment processors that it's being managed by the Mexican Central Bank, you also are going to need to have another different process, and this is like starting over. And this is more or less like a year or so. So there are a lot of things that when talking about an IPE, you will need to do. And depending on what would be the scope of things that an external advisement will do on your behalf, that would, be reflected on the amount.
One thing I'm really curious, Carlos, is particularly when you think about the future of regulatory engagements for both foreign and local companies in Mexico. What are you seeing on the horizon for legal requirements for these companies? Where are you seeing Mexico really trying to push the way when it comes to how they think about innovation, whether that's crypto or sort of other frontier technologies? And what can entrepreneurs that are perhaps in the early stages of their building process be aware of when it comes to the way they should think about sort of registering and going through the regulatory process over the course of the next few years that we haven't heard so much of?
We have in the legal space, it's really different because when you're talking about financial or fintech services or blockchain, related services, normally you are going to talk about, handling money for your clients or helping clients or, making something with your clients. And traditionally, when you're talking about an startup and what's being an entrepreneur, you can talk about a lean startup. So move really fast and start with everything, but not necessarily with the legal side of the equation, right? Just break things and then ask for permission later. But in the financial or fintech or blockchain ecosystem, when you are handling money of the population, normally in a lot of countries, even in Mexico, we have a limitation of receiving money from the general public because that's illegal. And there are, entities, special entities, and duly authorized by law in order to receive that. So if you do not want to be, subject to these investigations that we were discussing this before in this episode, and don't want to be subject to 15 or so years of imprisonment, then you will need to reach, to a lawyer or to a firm, try to understand what the hell you are doing, and in that extent, what do you require to do in Mexico in order to launch your venture? For example, there are different activities that will be possible for you, to start an MVP. But of course, it will be very limited. It will be in a closed network, and you will have a lot of limitations. But at the end, you will, being able to try your business model and to prove traction. And with that, you could scale on the permissions or authorizations that you will need to obtain before the Mexican financial regulator.
Really interesting. Really interesting. What do you think is a challenge for regulators, right? So we spoke about the challenge or what's coming up for companies in the region, what should they be aware of? But what are you seeing like regulators have to deal with now? There's a lot of conversations around stable coins, for example. A lot of sort of innovative DeFi protocols every day are reaching users more and more. It isn't just like buy and sell tokens, right? There are a lot more sort of complex crypto strategies coming to market. So from the regulator side of the house, where are you seeing the most face challenges when it comes to the way they navigate this really fast-moving landscape? Because the policy that you are working on today that gets implemented 1 or 2 years down the road may not be applicable. So how are regulators dealing with this complexity of this really rapidly moving innovation? Where are they primarily struggling right now in Mexico?
And on international things, what we have seen is 3 different approaches from the financial regulator. One of those is, I don't understand this, so I'm going to prohibit. I consideration made that this is very complicated. That what's blockchain, and what's smart contract. There's a lot of buzzwords that I don't really understand. So I'm going to prohibit that. The second approach that we have seen on international basis is let's try to understand this, but this is not important because we are kind of a babies for them in what we're talking about the potential users that we are acquiring, the volume of that, and they don't see us relevant. And the third one, it's the most important because they are trying to understand what's the good, what's the bad, what could you do with the with technology, what's the potential for that, and assessing that and taking that into consideration, they will issue prudential regulation, and this is like a set of general principles that you can work on, because they are sure that technology comes first, then the facts happen, and then reality is impacted, and from that you can issue regulation addressed to a specific thing. But on international basis, what we have seen is that regulators are evolving and are trying to see what would be the general principles that will be applicable not only now, but on all the things that are going to emerge from that specific technology. And we have seen that in the blockchain system, and also in the artificial intelligence ecosystem, for example, just to name a few things now. But we are also going to see that in quantum computing and big data analytics and so on. But for these kind of things, it's really interesting, because the things that you thought you could do right now are not the same that you are going to be able to do tomorrow. Every day we're having breakthroughs when we are assessing how to make things different. For example, when we first started back in 2017 with Legal Paradox, my legal firm, only focused on fintech and blockchain issues. We started with clients that didn't have a very interesting technological stack, but they were doing things different. And what we have seen after advice, like 490 companies, 8 banks, 7 unicorns, 3 big techs, the most important companies in the blockchain ecosystem that are publicly traded on international basis, it's that the evolution of their tech stack, it's really amazing. They are doing, and they are trying on daily basis a lot of things that were not possible before. So in that regard, this final approach that was saying that try to build principles instead of rules. It's trying to change the world all over with these kind of things, because as I was saying, the kind of things that you could do today, it's nothing compared the things you could do back then in 2010, or the things that you could do tomorrow. And in that regard, for example, we are also working on launching a smart contract on Solana, because we have been working on development of algorithm that uses artificial intelligence, big data, and analytics in order to try to find entries or potential entries to the financial stock market in the United States. And in doing that, for more or less 26 weeks or so, we obtained a yield of 380, if I don't remember correctly. And imagine that we could, through a smart contract built on Solana, putting that a tokenized fund in front of a public, and then for the first time ever, normal people are going to have access to these sophisticated tools that were, back then only accessible to the really sophisticated people with a lot of money, and you could, invest from 1 peso or so. So the things that are happening, are going to change the entire ecosystem in Latin America, because when you think about other countries like United States, United Kingdom, Singapore, those kind of countries, they have a lot of things figure out. And in Latin America, you only need to go outside in order to figure out a lot of problems. And come on, we are from Latin America. We have a lot of, imagination on how to make things different, and that's where the solutions for really hard problems are going to come about. And I really do think that Latin American entrepreneurs are going to put us on the map, and we are not going to be an emerging ecosystems. We are going to be the ones that are going to solve the real problems for the entire world.
Yeah, Kushan, I always say that necessity is a bigger adoption driver than passion or interest. Maybe people in other markets, they develop super complex DeFi protocols. We need payment. payment, for remittances, between peer-to-peer payments, so a lot of things. Perfect. So Carlos, let's start closing the episode. A question that I have is that you mentioned that companies can have a VASP and then operate with the regimes that you mentioned before. And I want to know if Mexico has a VASP entity or companies operate with a VASP that is abroad, maybe in other jurisdiction, and they operate with that in Mexico. And for the ones that don't know, a VASP is an entity that is a virtual asset service provider.
Yeah, and this is quite interesting because when the Mexican financial regulator were discussing these kind of things, they started to thinking about the approach that United States was having. In general terms, United States constitution made that you are engaging with United States citizens, that you are obliged by law, to comply with the United States regulation. And that's exactly what happened in Mexico. And back then, I believe it was 2020 or 2019, something like that. And the financial unit specialized in these kind of things before the Mexican Treasury issue a criteria saying that it really didn't matter where you were, operating, where you have your systems installed, or from which country you are doing that. Consideration made that you are having transactions with a Mexican citizen, then you are obliged in order to obtain the virtual asset service provider registry. And that was huge because then, nowadays we have like 58 or so companies that are already registered in this registry in Mexico. And we do not only have, the Mexican ones, but also very important exchange or blockchain companies from the international ecosystem that are registered here only because of this, right? So this is quite tricky because normally, if there's a general principle called reversal calling. So if you are, operated, like let's say at the Bahamas, and you only offer your services from people from there, but a lost Mexican then reach your site and start to request from sources. Normally, what would happen is you can operate because you are not addressing advertising specifically directed to Mexican citizens. But in here, that principle does not apply. And every entity or person or smart contract or whatever that it's having operations and transactions with Mexican citizens. This needs to comply with the Mexican legal framework. And of course, when talking about the exchange of virtual assets for fiat and so on, you will also need to have the VASP registration.
And the VASP, just to completely understand, it's a VASP in Mexico. Is it a registry, or you can have a VASP elsewhere and like import that?
No. You could be, incorporated everywhere,
Okay.
abroad from Mexico, and you could have, for example, a VASP in Estonia or any other country. But if you are at the end operated with Mexican citizens, you will need to be registered here before the VASP authority.
Okay, amazing. Perfect. Great, Carlos. So one question that we always ask people that we invite is, what's one thing that you think will surprise anyone that is not from LATAM or Mexico about your specific field? So what are the main things that when you tell them to your clients, they are like, what? How can that be possible?
Back in 2010, when we first started legal products, there were not a lot of law firms out there. So we started to do very interesting things. So, we were part of this international ecosystem called Legal Block, from which we, for example, advise Vitalik Buterin and other people in their interactive coin offer protocol. And then we started to work with Uport, a self-sovereign identity that was used by the Estonian government. And then we were, working with Consensus in their platform that is called Open Law, where you write a normal contract, and then in the back, they extract the necessary elements in order to create a smart contract, and so on. Then we started to work with, in the first international legal group in order to launch CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. Then we were part of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. Um, we started being part of the Stablecoin Association, and we were invited by the British Blockchain Association in order to join their international board of members. Then we were invited in order to perceive the legal working group on the Inter-American Development Bank, specifically the blockchain alliances that it's focused on promoting blockchain use cases in Latin America and the Caribbean. So one thing that shocks the entire persons that I'm having conversations with it, how a person from Mexico can be involved in all this. And I think that for the first time in the entire history, we as Latin American people, as Mexican people, can be on the side by side by the things that are happening and are being, we are writing history together. So that's really something that before we couldn't have, because you were left behind if you were from Latin America. But for the first time in history, you could be part or something else that it's not only you. And you can do it from your house, wherever you live, because this is on international basis. For example, we can have someone that is hearing this episode from Latin America, but we could also have someone from Singapore or Abu Dhabi
Yeah.
or I don't know which place. And for the first time in history, you are able to do this on an international basis. So I will say to you, try to see what's out there, what's really out there, and do things. Really
Yeah.
do things, because right now you can, change whatever you are thinking that it's not possible. You can change that and make it possible. So
Yeah.
just go out and build something.
Definitely, it's a matter of putting products in the street and see what does it stick. Carlos, thank you for coming to Frontera. How can people reach out? How can people send you an email if they wanna maybe get your legal advice? What's the best way of contacting you?
Yeah, and thank you for your time. It's a pleasure to be here. If any of your listeners wants to contact me, I'm on LinkedIn. Back in 2019 or so, someone thought at LinkedIn that I, put a lot of things out there, and they named me top voice on finance for
Hmm.
Latin America, whatever that means.
Amazing.
So if someone can reach to me, you could do it at LinkedIn and at Carlos Valderrama. I'm happy
Amazing.
to talk to
Perfect.
you.
We'll put your handle in the show notes. And if you're listening to us, you can follow me in at AbrahamCR. Also, please follow Frontera, subscribe to the newsletter. This week we're gonna post an analysis based on this episode on the legal frameworks in Mexico. I've had a lot of people have asked me what's the best way to start a company here. So that's gonna be really valuable information for you. And thank you for listening, and see you next time. Thank you, Carlos.
See ya.